You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1093. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. You just heard in our last episode from Paul Leviton, who was talking about change made easy. Now, Paul was one of our top 20 podcasts that people have ever listened to. So his episode a while back was that. Now, what I'm excited about is that today we also have another person, Nate Page, who his previous episode, we were talking about all sorts of different things, is again one of those top 20 podcasts that have been listened to. So I'll give you the details of that in a second. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about Nate. Nate is a licensed psychologist and certified group psychotherapist, specializing in facilitating groups designed for therapists. In a move that he would say I would applaud, and I agree, Nate recently bought the domain onlinetherapyfortherapists.com to explore how his PsyPack license, which allows him to practice in 40 states, can help therapists connect with high-quality individual and group therapy services. He's also a father of 4 kiddos, and Nate is currently navigating the challenges of divorce while continuing to grow as a parent, therapist, and human being. Nate, welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast.
I'm excited to be back. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, well, I should have read your bio before I read it live. So before we started recording, we could talk divorce. But wow, like navigating divorce. So we both now have that in common. It's in your bio, so clearly you're open to talk about it, I'm guessing. But like, how's the navigation of that going?
Well, in some ways, we're at the beginning stages of people knowing about it. We've been, privately considering it for a few years. And Joe, actually at Killing It Camp in Cancun, you were one of the first people that I spoke to because you had been public about it. And that was a helpful mini conversation, maybe a minute or two. But yeah, it's everything, quite the roller coaster. It's brutal, it's horrible, but it's also life-giving. And when it's the right decision, it is the right decision.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's anything that can prepare you for that, especially when kids are involved. And so, man, I mean, you've got my cell phone number. So as you go through things, feel free to have me be a connection with that, because there's so many things that go with it that I just didn't even think about. And so it's just like, having Claire, who you met at Killing It Camp a couple of years ago, we're still going strong, and just even integrating new relationships. And, when do you even consider that, depending on your divorce? And oh man, there's just so much that could be a whole episode right there. So
yes,
yeah.
It could. Well, I really appreciate that. It's very generous, Joe.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, and I think that also speaks to one of these projects that you're building around how lonely sometimes it can be for therapists. So like even Claire and I, we've been talking about like, what does commitment look like without getting married again? We both were in overperforming, underperforming relationships where we were both the overperformers, where we were compensating for a lot of shortcomings. And, we tend to both be kind of go-getters in a lot of ways, and recognizing that, we love each other, we want commitment, but also the institution of marriage we don't necessarily want. And so, we found a therapist that's gotten certified, and it's interesting because it's like, it's not a perfect fit because she's like, well, we're not going to just hash through all your fights and everything. I'm like, well, we aren't really like fighting. We're wanting to just better and discuss and kind of say, what does our life look like? And that challenge for therapists, I didn't want to in the first session be like, I'm also Gottman certified. And, it's like that just feels weird to say to your therapist because
Right.
it can feel kind of narcissistic. But also I don't want her to find out during, session 12, like she's been going through all this Gottman stuff. And it's like, yeah, like I get it. So that challenge of therapy for therapists. I want to hear, where did that idea come from to go beyond just maybe being known locally as, yeah, I'm a therapist that also like helps therapists, but to say, I'm going to buy this domain, I'm going to offer this across states. Like that seems like a really interesting thing that's needed. Like what's the seed of that idea?
Well, good question. And I think, yeah, it really is born out of just the work that I've done with therapists in individual therapy. But then I also, for years, have run groups for therapists. And it's just thrilling to work with therapists. And therapists are like any human beings. But the work that's often a bit more accelerated, people can go deeper, quicker. It's more fun, I think, working with people that have a model of change and are able to recognize maybe a bit quicker some of the parallel processes that are happening. They're sometimes more interested in having those corrective emotional experiences or getting into the deep things. And really what I have a passion for is just being able to have real talk with people and creating spaces, whether it's individual therapy or group therapy or podcasts, I suppose, but even a lot of presentations. I really like doing presentations at conferences or other places where, and a lot of the times my talks recently, they've been called real talk, like burnout. Let's really talk about burnout, or imposter syndrome. Let's really talk about imposter syndrome. So, I mean, this is, and this is not just me that's doing this new website, Online Therapy for Therapists. There's 4 of us, and we meet together weekly. We have for a couple of years, which started as a consult group for group therapists here in Minnesota, and we run conferences together. We're friends, but we're colleagues. And funny enough, we're all now in private practice. I was the first one, and then the other 3 have jumped ship and are now all in private practice as well. But I really value being able to have those relationships in those spaces, to have real talk with therapists, and to give therapists the space that they provide to others. It's just a wonderful thing. And so this idea really was born out of, I mean, listening to you, Joe, and doing SEO work. And I think it was probably 3 or so years ago, I was just searching, and therapyfortherapist.com was available. And at the time I remember feeling, ooh, that would be good. That would be a smart move to make. I would love doing that type of thing. I didn't move on it. And therapyfortherapist.com was taken. I think it goes to a private practice, a group practice now in Illinois. But online therapyfortherapist.com has been available, and I've been looking at it for a while. And it finally was just the right timing to move on that. And it's been thrilling to create the website. I hit publish on it yesterday. I spent about a week or 2 creating the website with my colleagues. And so it's live today. And so I'm curious to see where this will go. I have, of course, my group practice, and I do ADHD assessments as well. And that's thriving and moving well enough. So I get to play with ideas like this. And I think it was $35 a year through Bluehost to create the website. And so I want to see where it goes, how it develops, if it turns into more of a directory for therapists, or if it turns into more, therapists wanting training. But right now it's set up to do individual therapy with therapists that live in one of the 42 states that our SIPACT covers, the 4 therapists that are doing this with me. And then hopefully it will help even fill groups for therapists.
Yeah, and I think that I love how you said that you get to play with it.
Yes.
I think that so often, There's so many things we can do in the therapy world, and private practice is one of them. But I think a mistake some people make is they jump into new things, whether it's a podcast or a website or something like this. And we think right away, I'm going to monetize this thing. Right away, I'm going to be able to have this like take over my private practice. And I always encourage people, especially when we're doing the pre-consulting call, to think through like what's the bread and butter that's already easy. Like in therapy, you don't have to explain to people what therapy is. People show up for therapy. If you have good marketing, if you have good systems, it's not that hard to build a thriving practice. But there are times when we say, I don't want to keep doing this anymore, or I don't want to keep seeing this many people, or whatever the change is. And you can start to have those kind of side projects that you play with. But if you have that money coming in predictably, it makes it a lot easier to play and not put that extra stress of this has to make me money right away onto that new project, because a lot of things can take a long time. I mean, it wasn't probably till episode 100 of the podcast that we got our first sponsor dollar. And so that idea of giving it time to breathe and marinate and whatever analogy we use, I love that you use that term play, because kind of spaghetti at the wall at the beginning, you want to be able to give it that allowance to become something and to grow into something that maybe you didn't have a vision for initially.
Exactly. Well, and I'm in such a privileged position to be able to play. Whereas a few years ago, when I was in a college counseling center and wanting to transition into private practice, I needed it to work. And so there's a lot more stress and pressure, um, and it wasn't as much play. It was that rolling up my sleeves and the blood, sweat, and tears. So it really is a fortunate position to be in, and it's because of resources like you, Joe, and learning how to build a group practice and doing the uh, group practice boss and the other programs that you have, that I'm in a place now where I have a schedule. I have individual clients, I have group clients, I do ADHD assessments, but I get to follow my passion and follow the play, and the thought of, oh, I'd love to have more therapists on my schedule. That would liven me up. I get really excited when I get to do therapy with therapists, or I get really excited to meet with these friends and to build something new. So it's a privilege, and hopefully a lot of your listeners are at that place. And if they're not, hopefully soon they'll be able to get to this place where play becomes the main motivator day to day.
Yeah. Well, it was back in episode 679, your episode of why you should start a group practice. So that was a couple years ago, a couple podcasts ago. How have you grown your group practice? How do you think about group practice now, either differently or what's happened since then, in regards to your own growth with the business?
Yeah, well, I've really, I guess you could even use the word settled. For a while, the thought was, oh, I want to build the group practice. We'll hire more clinicians, and but we're at a pretty good number right now. There's three of us, and we really like each other. Our staff meetings each week are wonderful, and we're willing to bring someone else on, but it needs to be the right fit. Um, and we have, I mean, we're definitely not rich, but we're pulling in enough money that's sustaining us. We're able to put away towards retirement each month, and I think I'm at least not the person. There needs to be someone else that would really build that group practice into something bigger. And it is private pay. If we were to switch to insurance, then I'm sure we could build it quicker. So there's a number of things like that. But that's one of the things that I've really learned with your podcast, Joe, and other things, because so often there is that pressure. Well, I want more, I want bigger, or more money, or hire more people, and then it will be better. So it was nice to finally get more to the place of, no, this is enough. My income, it's enough. Sure, I'd like more, but what I value more is that freedom and that time, to be able to enjoy life. And so I mean, reaching that point of privilege where I don't need more, even though it is so easy to stay trapped in that keeping up with the Jones mindset of, well, I need more. I've been building, growing, going to first grade, second grade, third grade, then graduating. Then then what's the next thing? What's the next accomplishment to where I'll finally get to the grass is greener on the other side?
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, really wonderful to be releasing that more and more of, no, things are good enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been noticing that trend. We actually just did, back in August, it was open the State of Private Practice 2024 survey. And from the data we got from that, almost half of the people said that they weren't looking to grow in the next year. And so as we've looked at that data and said,
Wow.
okay, so like people are happy, they feel like they don't want to grow. So like we're actually creating a new arm of Next Level Practice specifically for solo practices. We're calling it Sustainable Solo Practice. And it's like a group within the group for people that are happy with where they're at in their solo practice. They don't really want to grow, but they do want to have that connection with other people. They do want to say like, how do you think about time and money, and have that support as a solo practice owner, but they're not looking to build a group practice. And I think that is such an important question to ask yourself, because, I could work 5 or 6 days a week. I could work evenings. I could make double the money if I wanted to, but what would I be giving up? What would I be paying for that? I'd be paying for my health. I'd be paying for my relationships. I'd be paying through, I have 85% or so custody of my kids. So I wouldn't be going to volleyball games. I'd be stressed out and maxed out. And I don't want that.
Right.
And so I do think it's so important. I love that you're doing this, that to think through like, when is enough enough? And so to know, okay, my family needs X number of dollars per year for us to live the type of lifestyle that we want to live. Okay, if I'm thinking about stretching a little bit and creating passive income, what might you want to do? So like right now I'm in the process of, right now paperwork's not signed yet, but probably buying a multifamily unit home, like a 3-unit complex that, it's right now bringing in more than what the mortgage will be. So like,
Nice.
there's things that I want to do that I want to step forward in, but I also don't want to give up certain boundaries in my life. And so I think that, saying, hey, this group practice, the size it is where I want it. But I think, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, that narrative of grow bigger, keep going. For me, and maybe this is being raised, Catholic in Northern Michigan, that, that idea of like, don't waste your talents. Like God or spirit or evolution has given you certain talents, certain, smarts. Don't waste those away. And so there's this never good enough feeling that I think can creep in if we don't challenge that, because then it's like, well, I have these talents. I should have a mega group practice to influence my community. I should. And then it just fills in. What do you think fuels for you, or has fueled, maybe you've overcome some of that idea of I should be bigger, that then eventually you had to challenge and say, no, I'm happy with where I'm at.
It's a good question. Yeah. And I mean, you talking about your Catholic upbringing, I think for me, yeah, family of origin stuff, that sense of, oh, if I sit down on the couch to relax, that maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Mm,
Productivity equals worth. I think that's just in the air that we breathe so much in our culture. Um, so I think that's a big part of it. I think for me and probably a lot of people, there is that survival instinct too, that, oh, I need to go, do, almost a Black Friday. Is that what it's called? Right after Thanksgiving, the Black
yeah.
Friday,
Yeah.
the scarcity model. I think there's the fear that, oh, I'm going to have a second rate life if I don't keep up with the Joneses. If I don't, get all the credentials and do everything and make all the money. So I think, yeah, that fear of a second rate life. But then I do think, I mean, I love podcasts. I love, researching things online. But I think there is, of course, that energy. If you're consuming things over and over again, well, this is how you build, this is how you grow. I think it can, I can easily feel that pressure that, oh, I'm doing something wrong if I take a step back. And so I think it's countercultural in many ways to say, no, I've eaten enough at the buffet table. I don't need to
Yeah.
eat more right now. I can wait till I'm hungry again.
Hmm. I am so excited about Alma. When I had my private practice, I struggled building my caseload, attracting the right clients, managing the business side. And honestly, one of the reasons I didn't take insurance was it was so difficult to navigate. So many of my consulting clients deal with these problems as well. And Alma supports clinicians in building rewarding private practices with simplified insurance credentialing in under 45 days, enhanced reimbursement rates, and guaranteed 2-week payback, plus a free profile in their searchable, filterable directory. making it easy for clients who are the right fit for your practice to find you. Learn more about how Alma could support your private practice at helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to learn more. So then you're shifting into helping therapists. When you do therapy with therapists, whether it's in a group or whether it's individually, how would you say working with therapists is similar to working with any client, and in what ways is it different? I know you touched on that a little bit at the beginning, but like are there other distinctions that for you would say therapists are different in this way and they're similar in this way?
That's a really good question. And at least the therapists that reach out to work with me, they are people that are wanting to do deep emotional work. They're wanting to practice being vulnerable. A lot of the perfectionism, imposter syndrome. Because I've heard other people talk about how therapists, they can have better defenses or defenses that are harder to get through, or sometimes therapists can be harder to work with, and that's probably true. But at least the people that are reaching out to work with me are therapists that know they're wanting to really have the real talk and really open up emotionally and really practice that vulnerability. So the groups that I run for therapists, they're delightful. We have conflict and we have messy things, and it takes courage to do it. But I think and it is just recognizing the humanity, where it is very, very similar to working with any person and whatever the diagnosis is or diagnoses for the therapist. So it's I don't know if I were to put a number on it, probably 80 to 90% similar to working with a general lay population, if you will. But I just really enjoy the accelerated pace and how quick therapists can get things and can really move to those deeper levels of connection. And it's just thrilling, I think. And I do think they're part of that, 10 to 20% that's maybe different than other populations is just the commonalities with burnout, with the vicarious trauma, being able to just be in a group setting or be in an individual therapy setting with a therapist that really gets it. Of this is what life is like as a therapist in an agency setting or private practice. So if I were to, probably my best answer is, yeah, there's some differences, but I really just do it because I like it. It brings joy, I think, to really be able to help therapists.
Now I'm wondering, I'm thinking about if I was part of a local kind of therapy group, how, if knowing that I may see these colleagues at like a LPCs of Northern Michigan meeting, or, if there's a United Way gathering or things like that. That's true always in any therapy group. But especially if you're in the same industry, it seems like there's extra layers there. And I know you're talking about, with some of what you're doing going kind of more national, so that will be less of a problem. But how do you address that? How do you think through that? What conversations do you have around just that extra potential for confidentiality, things that might get in the way?
Exactly. Well, and so I do. It's probably been 7-8 years. I've run a website called grouptherapycentral.com, and that's gotten a lot of traffic. And there's a lot of colleagues on there that advertise their groups for therapists. And I've done a number of presentations at the American Group Psychotherapy Association on exactly what you're talking about, Joe, the confidentiality and dual relationships. And you're exactly right. When there's the local groups, maybe in-person groups, it's a given that you're going to be in the group with other therapists that and that can create some challenges. I do online groups for therapists, and so there's a much less chance that you'll know anyone in the group. I run the groups very similar to how I would run any therapy group, where confidentiality is paramount. And then we do explore those dual relationships at the beginning, if there any exist, or if a new group member is coming in, and then try to right away deal with any dual relationships that would not work. And I've just found that therapists are actually pretty good at navigating those conversations because we've all done the ethics courses and we understand that. But I have, at least in my experience, it seems like there are a lot of therapists that are more interested in online groups because there's much less of a chance that they would have those relationships. But then there are a lot of people that are in the group therapy world, like myself, that go to the national conferences and we engage in groups all the time. And so we're always navigating those dual boundaries. And so some of my colleagues, it's not fully confidential. They'll say everything that you share in group is confidential, but your membership in the group is not confidential. And that kind of helps preemptively prevent some of those dual relationships that you're able to tell potential therapists that want to join a group, well, these are the names of the people in this group. Would that not be a fit for you? And then be able to share the name of the therapist that might be joining a group with the people in the group to preemptively navigate some of those things. So, and that just comes from the understanding that, well, there's no stigma. There's nothing wrong with being part of one of these groups. That's not disclosing too much. Whereas that would ethically not be a good move with most populations. So I don't know if that's getting at any of what you were asking, Joe, but it's a fascinating world, the groups for therapists world.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, and I think that I love that because I was thinking about, well, if that person thinks it's confidential, and then like that's great how you preemptively say that specifically so we can decide who's coming in, who's not coming in, things like that. Yeah, it makes me think like, where does it end? Maybe I should start a group for therapists that are leading therapists, and so it'd be people like you. No, I'm just kidding. So
There we go.
I'm wondering.
I'll join that group. I'm in. Joe.
Okay, all right. Maybe that's a new arm of what we do. So I'm thinking also like when you think about, so people are listening, they may have these ideas and maybe they shoot down their own ideas before they even launch something. If people were to think through how to play with ideas that they just want to try without taking on too much financial risk and too much like other risk, what would you suggest for people that have big ideas that they want to test out, that they want to play with?
Oh, I love that question. Of course, it depends on what the big idea is. I know for me, like I used to be so much more hung up on the anxiety of it, the potential legal issues, and of course want to have all my ducks in a row first. And of course, depending on the idea, that might be a good idea to have some good CYA practices. But at least for me, like in this website, it was just so easy to throw it out there, throw that spaghetti on the wall. And my anxiety has gone down so much. Part of it is the privilege that I have that if this tanks, then that's totally fine. But I remember in our episode that we did, however long ago it was, it's in the top episodes listened to, that emotional side of starting a private practice is, I think, one of the biggest barriers for people. The anxiety and the fear, and so I guess the best recommendation I have is just throw it out there, give it a shot,
Mm-hmm.
play.
Yeah,
go for it.
Oh no, I mean, yeah, like I have a whole chapter in Thursday is the New Friday about moving on it and how, top leaders intuitively will move on things before they're ready. And that's a skill I think that most of us as therapists need to develop because, we go through grad school, we do our dissertation or our thesis or, research. We don't just turn it in when it's half done. We don't want a therapist that shows up and doesn't know what's going on with a client. And so we tend to be people that overthink things. We become paralyzed by perfection. That's what you want in a therapist. That's what you want in a brain surgeon. That's what you want in a lawyer. But in the business world, having that minimum viable product, having an idea that we put out there, get feedback on it, realize even in ourselves, oh, for me personally, like I'm better at, and it takes less energy to do an interview than it is to do a solo show for the podcast. Learning about yourself, you're only going to learn that through doing it. And so I think that your advice of like, move on it, run with it, give it a whirl. You're going to get so much more data from that than any like whiteboard that you'd brainstorm out, like what's going to work, what's not going to work.
Yes. And just to add a few more thoughts to that, the more you throw the spaghetti at the wall, the more you try things and fail, the better you'll get at. And I think I've just been learning so much more how to move on things that feel right. And then the success rate, I think, seems to be going up. And this online therapy for therapists.com that just feels so right. So I have a good sense that something is going to happen with this. I can't predict how or where, but the energy that's there's something very real that's happening with it. And just the line that's in my head that my mom shared with me, I did a writing group. I helped her pull together a writing retreat for people that were wanting to write their personal histories for family history. And she just was talking about killing your babies with writing. And I had never heard that phrase before. Maybe it's common, but just the sentences or paragraphs or ideas that you've had that when it comes to the light of day, no, they really shouldn't survive. You just need to strike that paragraph or cut that out. And it can feel like killing a baby, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you're a lot more experienced in the business world, but I imagine that's the way it is. I actually heard Dave Ramsey yesterday on a podcast say that, I can't remember exactly, but something like 80% of his ideas are horrible. But he's gotten better at just killing them off quicker when they're not playing out well.
Yeah, that whole idea of like kill your darling, that's what I've heard in the writing world.
Okay.
That like kind of nothing's sacred. And I do think that even when people talk about their practices and they're like, it's my baby, it's like, no, like there's parts of your business, if not your whole business, that you may need to kill. Like your children, you don't do that to. And so that idea of like, we are going to do what's working, what brings us life, and move away from the things that doesn't. You know, like I was a LPC supervisor for years here in Northern Michigan. So for people that were limited license in Michigan, I had some of the largest supervision groups and like brought in other supervisors. It was like a movement of doing better and different supervision. And then I realized I hated it. Like we did 4.5 hours a month all at once. So then people from, around the state could drive in for it. It followed the state standards. It gave them the hours. People loved it. But then I realized doing 4.5 hours of supervision till like 9:30 at night, that's what worked for working people. It just didn't work for my family. And so it was like, I had to kill that off and then move into other things. But had I not done that, I wouldn't have the energy to do as many podcasts as I do now. I mean, we do, depending on the week, like 5 to 8 interviews a week. And I feel energized as much at the last interview as I do at the first one in the week. But that's because I've cut so much of just the BS out of my schedule to do the thing that really only I can do. I mean, I can have guest hosts, I can have, some of the consultants come in, but ultimately people listen to a podcast usually for whoever the main host is. And so it's like, that's a great use of my time and energy. And then the other things I need to say, okay, what's second to that? Probably individual consulting and pre-consulting calls, and then keeping the team going. And then other than that, the rest is like, if I have the energy, I'll do it, but I'm probably not going to.
Right. Well, and just to hear that you often have more energy after your last podcast interview, that's such a beautiful thing. And I remember in a recent podcast, you talked about, I think, your elementary school report cards, Joe, or what the teachers would say is that you couldn't get you to stop talking to your classmates, and that's what one of the main things you do professionally. And I've been thinking about that for myself, like, oh, what did my elementary school teacher say? And but what gives me energy day to day, and it is creative things like this, being able to throw spaghetti at the wall, try out new things, and I just get such a rush. I mean, Joe, you were with me at Killing It Camp with me learning how to do headshots.
Oh my gosh, such good. Claire still uses hers for all her professional ones.
Oh,
I
good.
mean, it's so, yeah. And we had such good couples shots. Like you were not at the beginning phases. You were so good at those headshots.
And that was part of the thrill, the fun of like, wow, this is actually pretty dang good, this product that I'm making, these headshots. And I mean, part of it, I think, is my ADHD nervous system, and the newness of something just lights me up. But yeah, so whether it's headshots or the ADHD testing or now this online therapy for therapists. So for me, I mean, that's what gives me energy, is being able to create something new. and yeah, then to be able to be on a podcast like this and talk about it is pretty thrilling.
Well, and I think part of it is finding those things that then like have some traction. How do we take, 95% of that off of Nate's plate, but keep that product going? And so, like over time being like, okay, like we got this website going. I'm finding my interests a little bit in here, but I want to just go do podcasts about the website instead of looking at the design behind the scenes. Well, then it's like we got to find those operational people, those project managers, the chief operations, the designer, and that they can proceed until apprehended. Like just today, I had a meeting this morning, and it was with Kate and Jen. So Jen's our project manager, so she's our head of projects and people. And then Kate oversees our membership communities. And so they were looking at the data from that 2024 state of private practice, and they noticed, as did I, but we hadn't talked about how many solo practice owners there are that didn't want to level up into something. And they met together and sketched out this whole plan for like this community within Next Level Practice. So a community within a community for solo practice owners that don't want to level up, but they want to be sustainable. And they named it the Sustainable Solo Practice Community or something like that. And it's like, that's what I want. I said to them, it warms my heart that you noticed something, you took action on it. We're 95% of the way there without me even knowing this was a project you were working on. And to me, that's like the difference between a micromanager when you're like, have a kind of fear mindset with your team. Like, oh, I don't want to spend extra money on these people if they waste their time. But it's like, no, that's where sometimes the best ideas come from. And we want that to be outside of the owner's time or the founder's time.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that, Joe. And that this whole new thing developed from people following their bliss, their joy, listening, of course, to your community. But then it was 95% completed before you even knew about it. And that's a wonderful use of energy.
So Nate, my last question always is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
If I follow my heart, and what I would really want them to know is I want every private practitioner to know that you are valued and loved, that the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And I at least hope that by listening to my voice and in this podcast that you feel some sense of strength and inspiration to keep doing what you're doing, but also be able to hopefully find more energy, more bliss in your day-to-day. And if you're not having that you can make the changes in order to get that. And I'd love to be a help in that process for you if it seems like I'd be a good fit.
So awesome. Well, Nate, if people want to connect with you, so online therapy for therapists.com is where they can go. What else should they know about that in connecting with you?
Well, I'd love for people to check out online therapy for therapists.com to give us any feedback that you have. I do want to see how this will grow and develop. And so when we sent out the email last night to all the people that we knew, we just asked, please fill out a contact form and let us know what you liked about the website, what you didn't like, any recommendations that you'd have, because that will really help us know where the energy is at and what therapists that are searching for therapy would actually want in a website. So you can connect with me through there, or just Google me and then find me on one of my websites and shoot me an email.
So awesome. Well, Nate, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thank you, Joe. It's an absolute joy to be with you.
I love what Nate's building, that idea of therapists being in therapy. My therapist that I've worked on one-on-one with for so long, Steve McCleary, has been such a gift to me in helping me develop as a person. And so however that looks for you, if you want to work on becoming a better you, or even just being okay with who you are or whatever, like find a therapist. Also, if you are trying to build your practice and the credentialing process is a little bit wonky, you should work with Alma. They help you get credentialed in under 45 days. They get enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed 2-week payback. Plus, they have a new free profile that you can be a part of. You can learn more about how they can support your practice over at helloalma.com/Joe. Again, that's helloalma.com/Joe to learn more. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.